country called, we were there. Hear the battles rise, see the brigadoon do. It's the flag of freedom in the air, always glorious, victorious, standing shoulder to shoulder till the end. While the world is turning, we'll keep the whole fire burning until we meet again. Over stormy seas, never far away. Never fear nor fail is the cross we bear, under crimson and blue. It's the rick-a-dam-doo, singing songs of freedom everywhere, always glorious, victorious, standing shoulder to shoulder till the end. While the world is turning, we'll keep the whole fire burning until we meet again. Under crimson and blue, it's a rick-a-dam-doo. Under crimson and blue, it's the rick-a-dam-doo.
70 days in the front lines, 30 days in support trenches, 120 days on reserve, 70 days at rest, and 2 weeks leave. This was the life of a soldier in World War I, including those that marched under the rick-a-dam-doo of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. 4 years ago, Canada's last World War I veteran died at the age of 109. The Great War marked our coming of age as a nation. Our soldiers fought for the freedom we now enjoy, and today, they are all gone. But we are here to remember them.
The First World War lasted from the 31st of July, 1914 to the 30th of November, 1917. British Empire and German soldiers engaged in 16 weeks of bitter fighting in appalling conditions of rain, mud, and slime. In the end, there were nearly 400,000 British Empire and 400,000 German casualties. The letter that follows is written by a John McCrae student who visited the Canadian War Cemetery as part of last year's school trip to Europe. She wrote a letter to a soldier who served his country during the war. This is why she remembers.
Dear a soldier of the 1939 to 1945 war from a Canadian regiment. This past summer, I visited the Canadian War Cemetery in Normandy, France. I thought that I had prepared myself for the large number of gravestones I would see, but I was wrong. They were overwhelming. It was crushing. I walked through the cemetery reading name after name after name of the Canadians that made the ultimate sacrifice. But of all the markers in the cemetery, of all the hundreds of names I read, row after row, yours was the one I stopped at. Yours was the one that broke my heart, and you are the one that I wish to honor. First, I want to address your family. The excruciating loss they suffered was very unlike that of any other family whose son also never came home. They never got the closure of knowing what truly happened to you. They did not receive your uniform. They did not receive your ID tags. They did not receive a wound stripe in your honor. They did not receive anything. How long do you wait for somebody before you have to accept that they are dead? For some, that could be a lifetime. To them, I offer my deepest condolences and the hopeful comfort that their son, brother, or father is finally being honored. Now, to address you. I stood in that cemetery staring at your grave for a very long time. My eyes darted across the words carved into the gray stone over and over. I felt as though if I read the words enough times that I would be able to somehow reach you. Somehow you would know I cared. It was really difficult to feel a connection with those unemotional words and the lack of a name, but I think that's human nature. We struggle with connecting with things that we can't physically see. The harder I struggled to connect, the more upset I got. And even though I don't know your age, your rank, your division, or even your name, starting that somber June day in Florence, France, I was honoring you, and I hope you could feel that. So, to the soldier of the 1939 to 1945 war, from a Canadian regiment, your gravestone says that you were known unto God, but today, you are known unto all of us. I will never forget you, and you are why I remember. A student of John McCray Secondary School.
We will always remember the brave men who fought for us on this day. More than 69,000 Canadian soldiers died in World War I. On May 3rd, 1915, Lieutenant Colonel John McCray wrote a poem, remarking that the fields that were once barren before battle exploded with blood-red poppies. The poppies grew all around the graves of the brave soldiers. It was this image that moved John McCray to include the poppy as one of the most prominent symbols in his poem, In Flanders Fields. Since 1921, the poppy has become a Canadian symbol of remembrance for those that lost their lives during war. For each poppy that we are about to place, 150 soldiers died during the First World War. We would like to recognize each and every soldier that risked their life for our country during World War I. Whether it was your grandfather, your great-grandmother, your great-uncle, or a friend of theirs, we remember.
In World War I, our soldiers fought for the freedom we now enjoy, and sadly, they are all gone. But here at John McCrae, they live on in our hearts. During World War II, maybe it was your grandfather or your grandmother leaving their homes 70 years ago to risk their lives for our country. Without them, we would not be here today. As we remember the voices and their sacrifices, we will continue the time-honored tradition of laying wreaths. One for those who valiantly lost their lives in the defense of our freedom, and the other for the honorable men and women currently serving in the Canadian Armed Forces. The first wreath will be laid by Mr. Schultz, Jalil Alab, and Julia Simon. The second will be laid by Miss Cote and Jackie Fuchs. And the third wreath will be laid by Mr. Paul Leck and Mr. Brent Howard. Finally, our fourth wreath will be laid by Lieutenant Commander Terry Bentley.
We will now have the playing of the last post. It will be followed by 2 minutes of silence, the lament, and the reveille. Would you please stand, and as a sign of respect for today's ceremony, we ask that you do not applaud.
Between 1939 and 1945, over 40% of the male population in Canada enlisted in the Canadian Forces. Over 1 million soldiers, nearly all volunteers, joined in the fight of the Second World War in the Royal Canadian Army, Royal Canadian Navy, or Royal Canadian Air Force. Over 45,000 of these Canadians never returned home. Many brothers left for Europe or Japan to fight together for a common cause. Several of those families lost more than one family member to the battles of World War II.
The next act of remembrance involves two voices. The first is that of a Canadian soldier serving in World War II. The second is the John McCrae student who is connected to this soldier. Listen to their stories, and you'll soon discover why the student remembers.
The sole thing I remained hopeful for was the letters that arrived in regular intervals. Everyone waited for the day that the unlucky fellow who was assigned mail duty would venture into the tents bearing the khaki-colored sack imprinted with the word mail.
It was the last letter he wrote, the last words he wrote on a page dedicated to his parents. The letter was very impersonal, and there were thick black lines covering some of the writing. This was a norm for those years. Whenever the government thought that a soldier was saying too much, they simply censored it out in thick black ink. The rest of the letter talked mostly about how he couldn't wait to be home and how he only had a few more weeks left.
Holland was an entirely new experience. We spent many hours of the day on patrol, cleaning our weapons, training, and practicing. It had been a long few weeks we had been here. Roy, Milton, and I were all prepared to return home. Times had been tough, but we knew that they were only that much more difficult for our mother and father. They were forced to accept the concept that they may possibly lose 3 sons.
I couldn't imagine having to live every day knowing that there was a chance that 3 of my sons may never return home, that they may never see any of them again, that we would never be a whole family again, and that I would have no control over it.
The sirens flared. The lieutenant ran from tent to tent, waking the men. We scrambled, grabbing everything. Finally, we gathered in the square, all at attention, waiting for further instructions. We were finally headed into battle. The Canadian troops were taking part in the Battle of Scheld. We marched on, bound for the eastern end of South Bevan.
The last letter was sent over a week before his death. The battle was long and hard, and they likely found little time to write. The last and final document was not sent by him. It was sent on behalf of the Canadian Army. It was a notice of death. The letter began with condolences, and it ended not long after. It contained little information on how he was killed or what had happened. The letter contained only one name, his name.
The battle was strenuous, and the casualties were heavy. I saw many friends fall, yet we continued to push on. Finally, after several days of heavy fire, we had taken the city, and we were ordered to continue moving inwards. On the morning of October 27th, we awoke to the sounds of repeated gunfire. We hurried to ready ourselves for battle once again. We were the unluckiest of the troops. Fighting in open roads, we lacked cover in most places, and this made it even easier for our enemies. We fought on, pushing the enemy back through streets and fields. As we neared yet another open area, I felt a sharp sting in my right shoulder. I could hear someone to my right screaming to get down. Before I could duck for cover, my knees gave out. My hand came up to clutch my shoulder. I pulled it away. My hand was covered in a warm, red liquid. I tried to look around, seeing where everyone else was. It didn't take long before my strength had faded. My eyes were heavy and difficult to keep open. Soon my eyes shut for one last time, and I took one last breath. With that breath, I was no longer myself. I was now service number C33021, grave marker 11-D-2.
He did not make it home alive. But I am honored to say that his name did. His name is now my name, which is why I will always remember.
There were no small contributions from Canadian soldiers in the war. Every man and woman who took it upon themselves to share this responsibility will not be forgotten, and it is our duty to ensure that their stories will not be lost.
Over 47,000 Canadian soldiers lost their lives battling in World War II. We will now place a poppy for every 130 soldiers that lost their lives during this conflict.
will now listen to the song Highway of Heroes by the Trews. It was written in honor of the 172-kilometer stretch of the Highway 401 that runs from the Air Force Base in Trenton, Ontario, all the way to Toronto, Ontario. This length of road, known as the Highway of Heroes, is the final homecoming path for soldiers who have lost their lives bravely fighting for freedom in Afghanistan. Canadians gather along the highway every time a convoy carrying the body of a soldier travels down the road. This gives fellow Canadians an opportunity to bid him or her farewell, show their respect, and give their thanks.
Unfortunately, the events that occurred 3 weeks ago resulted in thousands of Canadians, possibly some of you or your parents, lining the stretch of highway again, as another fallen Canadian soldier was driven home for the last time. Highway of Heroes will be sung by Curtis James and accompanied by Ian Venables.
Day I shipped out, they numbered a dozen. Upon my return, we're 100 or so. From the coast and from the prairies, I bet they keep coming. Add one more name, Ontario. Carry me home on the highway of heroes. People above, the flags down low. Carry me softly on the highway of heroes. True patriot love, there was never more. Serve with distinction, no visions of glory. I serve without question or personal gain. Seek no justification, it's not part of my story. It offers no comfort to the ones who remain. And carry me home on the highway of heroes. People above, the flags down low. Carry me softly down the highway of heroes. True patriot love was never more. Took my vocation, I was called by my nation. Without hesitation, my answer I gave. Now I am not wondering of the things that I might have been. I'm no consolation to the forgotten brave. And carry me home on the highway of heroes. People above, the flags down low. Carry me softly down the highway of heroes. True patriot love, there was never more. There was never more. There was never more. There was never more.
Just 5 years after the Second World War had ended, soldiers from North Korea crossed the 38th parallel and began the Korean War. From 1950 to 1953, Canadian soldiers fought in the valleys and the hilltops, through the monsoon rains and summer heat. By the time it was over, more than 25,000 Canadians had served in the Korean Peninsula and spent time away from home. The Korean War is often known as the Forgotten War, but not here at John McCrae. War is a part of Canada's past, as well as a part of Canada's present. Between November of 2002 and March of 2014, Canadian soldiers had served in a military capacity in Afghanistan. Preparation for these missions included 8 months to a year of training, with missions lasting 6 to 9 months, a drastic difference from how war was fought in 1914. Due to medical advancements, many of the soldiers that are injured will survive, but they will live the rest of their lives with their injuries from combat. In addition, many of our soldiers have to live with the psychological effects brought on by combat.
1 out of every 62 Canadian soldiers did not return from their mission in Afghanistan. The last moments of their lives were spent in the deserts of Kandahar. In the context of history, this may not seem like a great loss. 1 out of 62 may not seem significant, unless it's your father, your mother, your sister, your brother, or someone you love.
For those whose family members currently serve in the Canadian military, Remembrance Days may be different. One of our John McCrae students recounts how he felt during his dad's time overseas. Here is why he remembers.
It was a cold summer morning. I waited on the bench in the entranceway for my dad. He came down the stairs with a tan backpack. He sat down beside me and proceeded to put on his tan combat boots. When he was finished, he gave me a hug and told me he would miss me. He hugged my mom, and just like that, he walked out the door. I wondered if, and when, we would ever see him again. I sat there for a long time doing nothing, just thinking of whether my dad would be safe, and desperately trying to picture the next time I might see him. The first few weeks weren't very difficult because my dad had traveled a lot in his job, and this wasn't the first time he went to Afghanistan. It was, however, the first time he was part of the mission and not just visiting the camp. After the 2-week mark is when everything really started to kick in. I wasn't able to talk to him very often, and it was the longest I'd ever gone without seeing him. Throughout this entire experience, we lived in Petawawa, Ontario, which is the biggest army base in Canada. All but one of the kids in my class had at least one parent in the army, and many of them had a parent in Afghanistan. At school, anytime a soldier was killed, we would have a moment of silence after O Canada played in the morning. I remember looking around the class and checking to see if one of my friends wasn't there that day, wondering if it was their dad or mom we were honoring. My dad finally came home in December, but it was bittersweet. He was home and we got to see him, but at the same time, he was only able to stay with us for a brief visit. He had to go back to Afghanistan on December 17th, 2 days before my birthday, and he wasn't going to be home for Christmas. We had our own version of Christmas that week before he left, but it was not the same. That was the worst birthday and Christmas I have ever had. I wasn't very fun to talk to, as I was sad while trying to deal with my emotions, but being just 8 years old, I couldn't really do that all too well. 3 months went by, and finally, it was the day I'd been waiting for. My dad was coming home for good. I was so excited. I had no idea what to do with myself. It had been so long. The entire drive to the Ottawa airport, I had a smile that had never left my face. Nothing could break my excitement. We got to the airport, and I finally saw him come out the doors. I sprinted up and jumped straight into his arms. The worst 6 months of my life were over. My dad's job was to try and bring peace to a war-struck country. While they made great progress, they did not completely accomplish this. But at that moment in the airport, my mind was at peace. On Remembrance Day, my dad is why I remember.
We will will now be recognizing the brave Canadians who were mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, and friends who lost their lives in the Korean War and in the conflict in Afghanistan. We will be pinning poppies in honor of the 516 Canadians who were killed in Korea, and in honor of the 158 Canadians who lost their lives in Afghanistan since Canada joined the war in 2002. And we hope for the safety of all Canadians serving missions wherever they may be. For each poppy that we are about to place, 10 soldiers gave their lives. We would like to ask all of our guests and John McCrae staff to come forward and pin 5 poppies each.
lest we forget. The most recent sacrifices our fellow Canadians have made in the conflict in Afghanistan, as well as the many past sacrifices made in the Korean War, World War I, and World War II.
Dr. John McCrae, for whom our school is named, was appointed as a field surgeon for the Canadian Artillery when Canada joined in the war against Germany on August 4th, 1914. During the Second Battle of Ypres, John McCrae's friend and former student, Alex Helmer, was shot and killed. Later that day, reflecting on the death of his friend, John McCrae was inspired to write the poem In Flanders Fields on a scrap of paper. In the back of a field ambulance, Cyril Allenson, a young sergeant major, watched John McCrae write the poem. After reading it, Allenson was amazed that the poem had captured the exact scene on that day in early May of 1915. Dissatisfied with his work, McCrae tossed his poem aside, but his fellow officer found the poem and sent it to the newspapers in England. The poem was rejected by one publisher, but was later accepted by another and published on December 8th of 1915. It has since become one of the most significant war poems ever written. On January 28th of 1918, John McCrae died of pneumonia complicated by meningitis. He never made it back to Canada.
We will now hear the poem whose author, John McCrae, is our school's namesake. In Flanders Fields will be read by Scott Tulloch and Sabina Kukurudziak.
In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below.
We are the dead, short days ago. We lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow. Loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields.
Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw.
The torch be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields.
The influence of John McCrae's moving words continue to live on as we hear his poem recited, or as we read the words on the monument at the front of our school. Today, we want to honor and remember all 600,000 Canadians who have given their lives for our country and our freedom.
To conclude our Remembrance Day Assembly for this morning, Sanjay and I will pin the final 2 poppies in remembrance of the Corporal Nathan Cirillo and Warrant Officer Patrice Vincent, who tragically lost their lives in recent events. We would like to ask you to do one thing for us as you leave this service. Remember the 3 acts of remembrance you heard here today. Remember that they represent the thousands of Canadian men and women who risked their lives and made the ultimate sacrifice. How do you and how will you remember? Lest we forget, thank you.
This concludes today's service. Would all grade 9 and 10 students please return to your period 2 classes, and all grade 11 and 12 students gather your clothing for outside and meet on the 2nd floor outside the tech rooms.